It was 3:47 a.m. in the morning, and in 63 years I've learned that calls at this hour never bring good news. Hello. Static crackled through the line. Then a woman's voice, professional but urgent. Is this William Garrison speaking? Mr. Garrison, my name is Patricia Chen. I'm a social worker at St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. I'm calling about your daughter. My hand tightened on the phone. My daughter? Yes, sir, Jennifer. She's here and she's asking for you. The room tilted. I sat down hard on the edge of my bed, my wife staring beside me. That's impossible, I said. The words came out flat, mechanical. My daughter died 31 years ago. There was a pause. Mr. Garrison, I understand this must be shocking, but the woman here has identification. She says she's Jennifer Garrison. She has a birthmark on her left shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon. She says you used to call it her lucky moon when she was little. I stopped breathing. Nobody knew about that. Nobody except family. We'd never mentioned it in any missing person reports, never told the police. It was our private thing. Something I'd made up when Jenny was 3 years old, terrified of the dark. I'd trace it with my finger and say, oh, see? Your lucky moon is always with you. You're never alone. Mr. Garrison, are you there? My voice cracked. Where did you say she is? St. Paul's Hospital, the psychiatric unit. She was brought in 2 days ago after a crisis intervention. She's stable now, but she's asking for you. I looked at my wife, Eleanor. Her face was a ghostly white in the dim light from the hallway. Her hand pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with a storm of terror and a hope so fragile it could shatter from a whisper. We buried a tiny empty casket. We mourned for 31 years. We had a headstone with her name and dates. We visited it every year on her birthday, leaving little stuffed lambs, her favorite. How could she be in a hospital? How could she be alive? The social worker gave me details, visiting hours, protocols. I wrote them down with a shaking hand, the numbers blurring on the notepad. I hung up. The silence in our bedroom was louder than any scream. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice a thin thread of sound. William. It's a cruel joke. It has to be. The birthmark, Ellie. The lucky moon. Someone could have known, a nurse. Someone from the funeral home. But we both knew. We had never ever told a soul. It was our secret lullaby. A father's promise to his little girl. That night time dissolved. The past 31 years, the grief that had become a quiet companion, the hollow holidays, the way we'd learned to live around the gaping hole in our lives, all of it was suddenly thrown into question. Was it all a lie? Had our daughter been out there somewhere for all this time? And if she was, who took her? And why did they let us believe she was gone? Music swells slightly, then fades to a tense, subtle drone. The flight to Vancouver was a blur of clouds and torment. Eleanor clutched my arm, her knuckles white. We didn't speak much. What was there to say? Every possible scenario played in our heads, each more terrifying than the last. Was she hurt? Was she sick? Has she been kept somewhere? The psychiatric unit part of the call echoed ominously. St. Paul's was a large brick building, looming and impersonal. The psychiatric unit was on the 4th floor, accessed through a series of locked doors that buzzed ominously. Each buzz felt like a heartbeat. Patricia, the social worker, met us. She was kind, with gentle eyes that held a profound pity. She explained that the woman who insisted her name was Jennifer had been found disoriented and in severe distress near the waterfront. She had no wallet, no phone, just the clothes on her back and a small, worn backpack. When asked for a family contact, she gave my name and our old address from 31 years ago. She's fragile, Patricia warned. Her memories are chaotic, pieces. She knows who she is, but the timeline, the events, there are significant gaps. Trauma can do that. We followed her down a bright, sterile hallway. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Eleanor's breath was shallow beside me. We stopped at a door slightly ajar. Patricia gave us an encouraging nod and pushed it open gently. The room was small, with a window looking out on a gray sky. Sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands, was a woman. She had long, light brown hair, streaked with gray, tied in a messy braid. She was thin, too thin. She wore hospital-issued scrubs. She looked up, and the world stopped. It wasn't the face of our 6-year-old Jenny. Of course it wasn't. It was the face of a woman in her late 30s, but the eyes, they were Eleanor's eyes. The exact same shade of hazel, with the same tiny flecks of gold around the pupil. The shape of her brow, the curve of her jaw. It was like looking at a ghost, but a ghost that had aged, that had lived a life. She looked at me, then at Eleanor. A confusion washed over her features, then a dawning seismic recognition. Her lips trembled. "Daddy?" That one word in a voice I hadn't heard in 3 decades shattered me. It was older, weathered, but the intonation, the way it cracked on the second syllable. It was the same voice that had called for me in the dark. Eleanor let out a choked sob and took a step forward. "Jenny?" The woman, my daughter, stood up. She was unsteady. She took a hesitant step, then another, and then she was in our arms. We held her, the 3 of us, weeping in that sterile little room. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered, impossible joy. It felt like a miracle, a tear in the fabric of a cruel universe, allowing us this one gift. But even as I held her, feeling the sharpness of her shoulders, smelling the hospital soap on her skin, a cold, dark seed was planted in the pit of my stomach. A question that would soon grow into a consuming vine. If this was our Jenny, who did we bury in that little coffin? The first days were a hurricane of emotion and logistics. Jennifer, we started calling her Jenny again, though it felt strange on our tongues for a woman of 37, was discharged into our care. We took her to our hotel. She was quiet, watchful, like a wild animal learning to trust. She ate slowly, as if unaccustomed to regular meals. She slept for long hours, often waking from nightmares she couldn't articulate. The doctors called it dissociative amnesia, likely stemming from profound childhood trauma. Her memory was a puzzle with most of the pieces missing or forcibly jammed into the wrong spots. She remembered us. She remembered her yellow bedroom with the lamb-printed curtains. She remembered the taste of her mother's apple pancakes. She remembered the lucky moon. These memories were bright, vivid islands in a sea of fog. But the memory of the day she disappeared? Gone. The years in between? A vast, terrifying blank punctuated by what she called flashes. "Dark places," she whispered one evening, curled on the hotel sofa. Cold. A room with no windows, the smell of damp earth, and a voice, a woman's voice, singing. But it wasn't a nice song. It was sharp. Eleanor would hold her hand, tears streaming silently. My heart broke anew every time. But my mind, the part of me that had been a systems analyst for 40 years, the part that needed order and cause and effect, was working. Someone did this. Someone took our child and created a 31-year nightmare, and they had to pay. We needed answers the memories couldn't provide. We started with the physical. We took her to a private clinic. Dental records from 31 years ago were useless. Baby teeth were gone. But there were other things. The crescent moon birthmark was there, faded but unmistakable. Then the doctor found an old, healed fracture in her left forearm. Jenny had no memory of breaking her arm, but I did. When she was 4, she'd fallen from the swing in our backyard. A clean break. I drove her to the emergency room, her little face pale but so brave. I held her hand while they said it. The doctor who treated her was a young resident named, I struggled to remember, Dr. Armitage. The records would be archived somewhere. We submitted a formal request to the hospital, citing a family medical history project. A week later, the records arrived. The X-ray from 31 years ago. We compared it to a new one taken at the clinic. The match was perfect. The unique alignment of the bones, the specific way it had healed. The medical expert we consulted stated it was, for all intents and purposes, a fingerprint. This was, without a single scientific doubt, our daughter. The confirmation was a second wave of relief, followed by a tsunami of rage. It was real. She was real. Her suffering was real. And the lie we had lived was real. We had to confront the past head-on. We flew back to our hometown, the place we had fled because every street corner held a ghost. Jenny came with us. We went to the old house. We visited the cemetery. Standing before that small, weathered headstone, Jennifer Ann Garrison, beloved daughter, 1978-1984, was the most surreal moment of my life. My living, breathing daughter stood beside me, reading her own name etched in granite. "Who's here?" she asked quietly. "We don't know," I said, my voice thick. "But we're going to find out." We went to the police. The case, long cold, was reopened with a seismic jolt. The original detective, now retired, was brought in. He was stunned, apologetic, but also defensive. "Mr. Garrison, we had a body. The ID was confirmed by the family dentist." The family dentist. Dr. Lionel Shaw. A kindly older man who had been our neighbor. He had been the one to identify the tiny, water-damaged body pulled from the river 2 weeks after Jenny disappeared. The body was too degraded for visual identification, he'd said, but the dental charts matched. We were too grief-stricken to question it. We trusted him. A suspicion, cold and venomous, began to coil in my gut. We requested the exhumation of the grave. It was a grueling legal and emotional battle, but we prevailed. The small casket was lifted from the earth. Forensic science had advanced tremendously in 31 years. DNA testing took weeks. The day the chief of police called us into his office, his face was grim. "The remains in that casket," he said, "are not Jennifer Garrison." The air left the room. The dental records were falsified, deliberately and skillfully. The body was that of an unidentified female child, approximately the same age, likely a victim of a different tragedy. Someone used her to close your case, to make you stop looking. Eleanor broke down. I just sat there, a cold, hard stone forming in my chest. It was confirmed. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a conspiracy, a theft, a murder of a family's life. "Dr. Shaw," I said, the name feeling like poison. The police brought him in for questioning. The elderly man was nervous, sweating. He stuck to his story for an hour. Then, when confronted with the DNA evidence and the threat of prosecution for obstruction of justice and falsifying records, he cracked. He didn't take her, he sobbed. He was paid. A large sum of cash left in an envelope in his mailbox. With it was a note. "Confirm the match. The family needs closure." He was going through a financial ruin at the time, his practice failing. He saw it as a mercy, he claimed, to give us certainty, to let us grieve and move on. He never asked who sent it. He took the money and signed the form. The police traced the envelope, the paper. A dead end, of course. But they had one more thing. A memory from a retired officer who was first on the scene when the body was found. He recalled a woman lingering at a distance, well-dressed, upset but not like a random bystander. He'd asked if she was okay. She said she was a family friend, just horrified by the news. He never took her name, but he remembered one detail. She had a very distinctive piece of jewelry, the old cop said, squinting at his memory. A brooch. Gold. It looked a little music note or maybe a symbol. A symbol. I knew that brooch. The brooch was a treble clef, made of delicate, twisted gold. It belonged to my wife's oldest and dearest friend, Miranda. Miranda and Eleanor had been inseparable since college. She was Jenny's godmother. She was at our house constantly. She adored Jenny. When Jenny disappeared, Miranda was our rock. She brought us food, answered the phone, handled the media. She sang a hymn at the memorial service, her voice breaking beautifully. She held Eleanor as they lowered the empty casket into the ground. The treble clef brooch was her signature piece. She was a piano teacher. She wore it every day. She said it reminded her that music was the voice of the soul. Now that symbol felt like a scream. I didn't say anything to Eleanor, not yet. The betrayal was too monstrous, too unfathomable. If Miranda was involved, it would destroy my wife all over again. I needed proof. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. I started digging into Miranda's life 31 years ago. It was difficult. This was before digital footprints. I hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Ben with tired eyes and a relentless manner. We looked at everything. Miranda was unmarried. She lived alone. Her piano studio was moderately successful. But Ben found something. In the year after Jenny's disappearance, Miranda suddenly paid off a substantial mortgage on a property she owned. A small, secluded cabin in the woods about 2 hours north of the city. A property no one really knew about. The payment was in cash. A cash amount that matched almost exactly the withdrawal made from her savings account the week before Jenny vanished. A planned withdrawal, before my daughter was taken. The cabin, Jenny's flashes. A dark place, cold, the smell of damp earth, a woman's sharp singing. My blood turned to ice. I couldn't wait for the police. Their progress was slow, mired in procedure and the antiquity of the case. I had to know. I told Eleanor I was going on a business trip, a lie that sat like ash in my mouth. I drove north, following the coordinates Ben had given me. The cabin was exactly as described. Old, made of dark logs, nestled in a thicket of pine trees so deep the sunlight barely reached the ground. It felt heavy. Silent in a way that wasn't peaceful but watchful. It was unlocked. The inside was dusty, frozen in time. It had the musty smell of a closed-up place. It was sparsely furnished, a small kitchenette, a sitting area with a threadbare sofa, and a door. A solid door with a heavy bolt on the outside. My hand shook as I slid the bolt back. The door creaked open. It was a small room, no windows. A bare, stained mattress on the floor. A bucket in the corner. On the wall, someone had scratched marks. Little vertical lines grouped in fives, hundreds of them. A prisoner's calendar. And in one corner, tucked under the mattress leg, was something faded and threadbare. I bent down and picked it up. It was a small handmade cloth lamb. The stitching was clumsy, childlike. I recognized it instantly. It was a craft project Jenny had made in kindergarten just months before she vanished. She'd been so proud of it. She called it Lambie. We had thought it was lost. We had thought it was buried with her. I sank to my knees in that horrible little room, clutching Lambie, a sound of pure agony tearing from my throat. This was where she was kept. For how long? Weeks, months, years? The marks on the wall? My mind couldn't process it. Miranda, the beloved godmother, the singer of hymns, the holder of hands. She had done this. She had taken our child and locked her in this hole. But why? The answer, when it came, was more monstrous than I could have ever imagined. I returned home, a hollowed-out shell. I had hidden Lambie, the evidence. I needed to confront Miranda, but I had to do it in a way that would make her confess. To get the full truth, not just the what, but the why. For Jenny, for Eleanor, for myself. I began to piece together Miranda's history with Ben's help. We dug deeper into her family, her past. We found hospital records from a private facility dated a year before Jenny was born. Miranda had been admitted. The diagnosis was listed under an old, cruel term: hysterical pregnancy. She had been convinced she was carrying a child. She had shown physical symptoms, but there was no baby. It was a psychological break stemming from a profound, desperate desire for a child of her own. She had been unable to conceive, and a failed relationship had shattered her dream of a family. She was treated, released. She seemed to recover. She poured her love into Jenny, her goddaughter. The psychiatrist I consulted after I laid out the facts hypothetically used a term that made my skin crawl: attachment pathology leading to filial appropriation. In simple, brutal words, she took the child she couldn't have. She saw Jenny not as Eleanor's daughter, but as her own, a replacement for the phantom baby she lost. But taking her wasn't enough. She had to make sure she could keep her. She had to make the real parents disappear from the equation. So she engineered the most horrific closure possible. She found a lost, unidentified child's body. She paid off a weak man to falsify the records. She gave us a grave to visit so we would never, ever look for the living. And then, what? She kept a 6-year-old in a cabin? Forever? Jenny's flashes were coming more frequently now, triggered by therapy, by safety. One night she had a breakthrough. She remembered more of the voice. She wanted me to call her Mama, Jenny whispered, her face pale. I wouldn't. I kept calling for you and Mom. She'd get angry. She'd sing that sharp song right in my face. Then she'd be sorry. She'd cry and hold me and say we were a family, just us two, hidden away from the world. But a child is not a doll you can hide in a cabin forever. As Jenny grew, the risk of exposure grew. Miranda had to move her, to integrate her into some kind of life. The blank space in Jenny's memory, her teens, her 20s, that was the next mystery. Where had she been? Ben found a trail. Through careful cross-referencing of Miranda's travel and financial records, he found a pattern. For over a decade, Miranda had made regular, discreet trips to a city several states away. She claimed they were for music conferences, but the dates never matched any conference schedules. During that same period, a Jane Doe was admitted several times to a hospital in that same city. A young woman with no ID, suffering from anxiety, disorientation, and signs of neglect. The descriptions matched an older Jenny. Miranda had created a hidden life for them, a nomadic, shadowy existence. Moving from place to place, keeping Jenny isolated, dependent, mentally unwell, controlling her completely. She had homeschooled her, cut her off from the world. Jenny's entire identity was what Miranda allowed it to be. And then, something changed. Jenny, in her late 30s, had a moment of clarity, a fracture in the wall Miranda had built in her mind. Perhaps it was a news segment about missing children. Perhaps it was a glimpse of a happy family. Something broke through. She remembered. She remembered William and Eleanor. She remembered a yellow room. And in that moment of terrifying clarity, she ran. She took a bus, aiming for the only home she could remember. She ended up lost, in crisis, on the Vancouver waterfront. But she had my name, and she used it. Miranda had lost control. Her stolen daughter had escaped the narrative. Now I had to make her confess. I planned it like a military operation. I invited Miranda over for dinner under the guise of needing her support with Jenny's ongoing recovery. I positioned a voice-activated recorder in the living room. I was calm. Eleanor was nervous, but she trusted me, believing I just wanted to include Miranda in our miracle. Miranda arrived. She looked at Jenny with a gaze that now made my skin crawl. a possessive, hungry, terrified love. She hugged her too tightly for too long. "My sweet girl," she murmured, "you're home." Throughout dinner, I steered the conversation. I talked about the cabin we were thinking of buying, a quiet place in the woods. I saw Miranda's fork hesitate. I mentioned Jenny's memories of a cold, dark room. Miranda's smile became rigid. Then after dinner, I brought out Lambie. I had cleaned it. I handed it to Jenny. "Look what I found in an old box," I said, my eyes locked on Miranda. Jenny's face lit up with a pure childhood joy. "Lambie!" she cried, clutching it to her chest. Miranda turned white. The color drained from her face so completely I thought she might faint. She stared at the toy as if it were a ghost. "I never thought I'd see that again," I said softly, turning to her. "Isn't that right, Miranda? You thought it was gone forever. Just like you thought Jenny was yours forever." The room went deathly quiet. Eleanor looked from me to Miranda, confusion turning to dawning horror. "William, what are you talking about?" Miranda's voice was a thin scrape. "The cabin, Miranda. The bolt on the outside of the door. The marks on the wall. The treble clef brooch seen near the river where you planted that poor, unknown child. Dr. Shaw and his envelope of cash." With each sentence, her facade cracked. She began to shake. "You don't understand. You couldn't—" "Understand what?" I said, my voice rising, the rage I had kept bottled for weeks finally boiling over. "Understand that you stole my child? That you locked her in a dark room? That you made us bury an empty coffin and mourn for 31 years? That you murdered our lives? She was mine." The scream tore from her, primal, unhinged. It shattered the last pretense. "I loved her first. I loved her more. Eleanor had everything, a husband, a home, a beautiful baby. I had nothing. The music, it was empty. Jenny was my music, my perfect, beautiful child. You were going to move away. You told me you were moving for William's job. You were going to take her from me." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears of betrayal and horror streaming down her face. Miranda was sobbing now, collapsing in on herself. "I just wanted to keep her close. The cabin was just temporary. Until I could make her see. Until she would call me Mama. But she never would. She just cried for you. So I had to make you go away. I had to give you a reason to stop looking. I found that poor little girl by the river. It was a sign. It was the only way we could be together. A real mother and daughter." She spoke of the decades of hiding as a journey, a special life only we shared. She was utterly, tragically insane. The love was real, but it was a love that had grown in the dark, twisted into something monstrous. The recording device captured every damning word. The police were waiting outside. They had heard everything through a live feed Ben was monitoring. They took Miranda away. She didn't fight. She just kept looking back at Jenny, her eyes pleading. "My baby, I'm your mother." Jenny hid her face in Eleanor's shoulder, trembling. The woman who had been her captor, her jailer, the architect of her lost life, was also the only constant presence in that life for 31 years. The psychological damage was immeasurable, a labyrinth we were only beginning to navigate. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording, the cabin, Lambie, the financial trails, the falsified dental records, and now, Miranda's own confession. She was found guilty of kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, and a dozen other charges. She was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility, deemed not fully fit to stand trial for reasons of insanity, but never to be released into the world. It was justice on paper. But it felt like ashes. There was no triumphant victory. There was only the bleak, exhausting reality of picking up the pieces of 3 shattered lives. Jenny began the long, painful work of true recovery. She wasn't just reclaiming memories. She was building an identity from scratch at 37 years old. She learned to use a smartphone. She got her GED. She started painting, pouring the colors of her lost world onto canvas. The nightmares lessened, but never fully went away. Eleanor and I went to therapy. We had to mourn not just the loss of our child, but the betrayal of a friendship we had held sacred. We had to learn to be parents to an adult daughter who was also in many ways a wounded child. Our marriage, which had been held together by shared grief, now had to be rebuilt on a new foundation of shared trauma and a fragile, precious hope. One afternoon, a year after the call, Jenny and I were in the backyard of our new home. We had planted a garden. She was looking at the moon, a slender crescent in the twilight sky. "My lucky moon," she said softly, not looking at me. "It always was," I said, my throat tight. "She used to tell me you and Mom didn't want me," Jenny said, her voice steady but quiet. "That you gave me to her. That the world outside was bad. For a long, long time I believed her." I didn't know what to say. The damage was so deep. "But I always had this feeling," she continued. "This little piece of warmth deep inside, like an ember. I didn't know what it was. Now I think it was the memory of you tracing my birthmark. It was the sound of Mom's laugh. It was the taste of those apple pancakes. You can lock someone in a dark room, but you can't lock away the light they already put inside them." I put my arm around my daughter, my miracle, my tragedy, my surviving joy. We stood there under the crescent moon, two broken people slowly helping each other mend. The revenge was complete. The betrayer was exposed, imprisoned, her narrative destroyed. But the victory was not sweet, it was sobering. It was a lesson written in 31 years of tears. The moral of this story isn't about the brilliance of a plan or the satisfaction of vengeance. It's about the terrifying fragility of trust. It's about the monsters that don't live under the bed but in the living room singing lullabies. It's about the fact that the most profound evil is often dressed in the gentle cloak of love. But it's also about the invincibility of a single true memory. A father's whispered promise against a little girl's skin. A mother's specific recipe. A handmade lamb. These are the seeds of light that can survive decades of darkness. They are the silent, unkillable truth that waits patiently for its chance to lead you home. So hold your loved ones close. But also, listen to the quiet doubts. Guard the private truths that belong only to your heart. Because the world can be a beautiful place, but it also holds rooms with bolts on the outside. And the call that comes at 3:47 a.m. might just be the beginning of unraveling a lie so vast it holds your entire life hostage. If this story moved you, shocked you, made you hold your family a little tighter tonight, then do us a favor. Subscribe, like, comment below with one word for what you're feeling right now. Let us know you're part of this community that believes in truth, in justice, and in the unbreakable bonds that even time and betrayal cannot fully erase. Until next time, remember to look for the light.